Dear colleagues, dear friends, Your Excellencies, we are about to start and we apologize for the delay, but surprisingly, everyone whom we invited turned up today. And we consider it as a success on the one hand, but apologies for the time, for the change of time of the start. So let me give the floor to Vice-Rector Andrey Baykov for his short welcoming remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katerina. Dear friends, dear colleagues, Your Excellencies, dear students, we are extremely glad to see all of you showing up, and we are surprised to see such a turnout. Therefore, we ask you to excuse us for our tiny delay to accommodate everyone willing to participate today. I'm Andrey Baykov, I'm Vice President in charge of Research Affairs, and I'm also curating the ASEAN Center here at MGIMO, so it's extremely pleasant for me to launch this book presentation, which has been some time in the making and which also reflects my own research interests. Incidentally, I'm right now writing up a chapter on the ASEAN Centrality principle in East Asian regional architecture, which makes this participation of mine here extremely interesting for myself as a researcher as well. As you know, this year marks ASEAN's 55th anniversary, which is obviously a huge milestone and a long road of the association's development. And this anniversary takes place amidst increasing and unprecedented international turbulence. Thus, even more relevant it is to discuss what ASEAN and Russia, as two powers present in the region, can do to mitigate this turbulence. The ASEAN Centrality is a relatively new phenomenon from a historical point of view. During past 2 decades, the idea of placing ASEAN at the center of wider regional institutional network already brought multiple benefits for the entire regional development. Apart from ASEAN member states themselves, Russia and many other associations' dialogue partners were among direct beneficiaries of this principle. However, understanding and perceptions of ASEAN centrality may vary and still require more research into. On behalf of MGIMO University, I would like to express our profound appreciation for our today's speaker, Ambassador Elizabeth Buensuceso, the author of the book ASEAN Centrality, an autoethnographic account by Philippine Diplomat. The book was published by Singaporean Institute of Southeast Asian Studies. This is actually the second time that Ambassador Buensuceso addresses the audience here at MGIMO, and we warmly recall our previous discussions with her, which took place within the framework of the international conference dedicated to the 45th anniversary of Russia-Philippines diplomatic relations. Ambassador Elizabeth Buensuceso is the Philippine eminent person to the high-level task force on ASEAN communities post-2025 vision. She is a well-known and experienced Filipino diplomat who has been with the Philippine Foreign Service for more than 40 years and coordinated European and ASEAN affairs. Her wealth of working experience includes such positions as Undersecretary in the Philippine Department of Foreign Affairs for bilateral and ASEAN affairs and Philippine ASEAN SOM leader. Ambassador was the permanent representative of the Philippines to ASEAN for over 6 years and the Philippine representative to the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. She was also ambassador to Norway and Laos. Let me also express my gratitude to Her Excellency Rosario Manalo and His Excellency Bilahari Kosikan and Dr. Victor Sumsky, of course, who all agreed to join the discussion today. This is a great pleasure also to see the representatives of the ASEAN embassies who agreed to come and attend. I sincerely congratulate you all with the ASEAN's anniversary. Please rest assured that MGIMO and the ASEAN Center at MGIMO University will continue to pay special attention to ASEAN, various aspects of ASEAN activities and the constituent member states in our everyday work and through the activities of the ASEAN Center and our various departments. Last but not least, let me welcome to MGIMO the group of ASEAN journalists who are in Moscow for a very productive and intensive program organized by the Gochikov Fund with the support of Russia H.E. Media Group and the ASEAN Center at MGIMO. Our audience today, as you can see, also includes students and staff who are professionally interested in the ASEAN-related issues. With the gathering of this caliber and quality, I believe that the discussion on the ASEAN Centrality will be professional, engaging, and intellectually stimulating. Before we start the book launch, let me pass the floor to Ambassador of the Republic of the Philippines, Igor Bailen, for his welcoming remarks, and thank the Embassy of the Philippines for their very effective support for this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice-Rector, Dr. Andrey Baykov, and the family of the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, MGIMO, especially the ASEAN Center led by Professor Dr. Ekaterina Koldunova. Dobry Utra to everybody present and those joining us online. Chairman of the ASEAN Moscow Committee, Ambassador It Sela of the Kingdom of Cambodia, Excellencies, ASEAN colleagues, colleagues from the Russian Foreign Ministry, and the academic community. And Dobry Din, good afternoon, Manila and Singapore. We are very delighted to be with you all. Let me first congratulate MGIMO ASEAN Center for this important event. We worked with Dr. Valeria Vershinin over several months to make this happen. 55 years since its founding in 1967 in Bangkok, with 5 member states, to now with 10 member states led by Cambodia, grouping almost 700 million people together, or about 9% of humanity, ASEAN has come a long way. It has achieved so much and has become a model for other regional organizations worldwide. Its success comes from overcoming challenge after challenge through the decades, not only regionally, but also globally and even nationally, subject to ASEAN's cardinal principles, then as well as now. Despite, or even because of, the present challenges, ASEAN and the Russian Federation continue to be engaged on matters of mutual interest, on things that matter. Words matter, books matter, diplomacy matters, and ASEAN matters. So today, with the power of modern technology, we're linking Moscow and Singapore with Professor Bilahan Kausikan of the National University of Singapore, and of course, Manila, where the Philippines' eminent person to the high-level task force on the ASEAN Community's post-2025 vision, former Deputy Foreign Minister Elizabeth Buensuceso, will share with us something of genuine value. ASEAN Centrality, an autoethnographic account by a Philippine diplomat, distills not just her long experience in ASEAN, as ambassador and permanent representative to ASEAN in Jakarta, as well as the Philippine representative to the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. It is also informed by her 40 years of professional experience in bilateral, multilateral, and European diplomacy. Ambassador Buensuceso's book can show us, for example, how partners including Russia may better appreciate and support ASEAN centrality, even in the context of the broader Indo-Pacific regional dynamics. In doing so, all sides can develop even more meaningful cooperation in many areas. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. recently made his first foreign travels to Indonesia and Singapore, underscoring the overriding importance of ASEAN in Philippine foreign relations. I believe that the President will carry out our priorities in ASEAN when he meets with other world leaders next week in New York at the opening of the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly. And today, I can't be happier nor prouder because, in addition to Ambassador Buensuceso, Also joining us from Manila is my first boss and mentor in the Department of Foreign Affairs, former Deputy Foreign Minister, and Ambassador Rosario Manalo. Through the years, she has been a role model and inspiration to me, to Ambassador Buensuceso, and many others. We owe her so much as the Director General for ASEAN Affairs in the Philippines in the formative years in the 1970s. Ladies and gentlemen, I share the hope that today's event will generate more interest for stakeholders, all of you, to also develop a deeper understanding and appreciation of ASEAN Centrality. Again, thank you very much to the ASEAN Center for your leadership in promoting ASEAN affairs across the Russian public and private sectors, especially in the academe, among students who will one day work on one or more or all of the ASEAN countries as professors or diplomats. And thank you to the broader academic community like Mrs. Manalo, Professor Kausikan, and Dr. Victor Sumsky, Senior Expert of the ASEAN Center, for continuing to touch the future by teaching and mentoring you, our dear students, who will eventually make your own contribution to the building of our countries, of ASEAN, and of enduring regional and even global peace and prosperity. Bolshoi Tibia Spasiba.
Ambassador, Vice-Rector, thanks for your very enlightening and inspiring remarks. And I think that without further ado, we will proceed to Ambassador Buensuceso's presentation and talk, who agreed to share her opinion and views with us today. Please, Ambassador, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. To my dear beloved mentor, Ambassador Rosario Manalo, Ambassador Bilahari Kausikan, I remember you as a diplomat, so please forgive me for using that title instead of professor. Ambassador Igor Bailen, a very good friend of mine, members of the ASEAN Moscow Committee and the Diplomatic Corps, Dr. Katerina Koltunova, Dr. Andrey Baykov, Dr. Victor Sumsky, officials and students of the MGIMO University, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to our friends in Moscow, and good afternoon to those in our part of the world, Singapore, and the Philippines, and others who might be joining us today. Thank you, ASEAN Center, and the MGIMO University, and the Philippine Embassy in Moscow, under the leadership of His Excellency Igor Bailen, for spearheading this book presentation. I'm also honored that His Excellency Bilahari Kausikan and my good friend, Her Excellency Rosario Manalo, have agreed to be our discussants for today. Both these esteemed luminaries in ASEANology have a deep and comprehensive understanding of ASEAN, with their own experiences as their respective countries' representatives in many ASEAN bodies, as well as enriching that experience of theirs later on in the academic field where they are now. A basic characteristic of this book that we are currently discussing. They have been in the situations I described in the anecdotes and stories I told in the book. The title of the book is ASEAN Centrality, an Autoethnographic Account by a Philippine Diplomat. It provides us a summary of what it is about and what it intends to do. It aims to provide a definition of ASEAN centrality from the perspective of a practitioner using the methodology called autoethnography. Let me first introduce the big word here, autoethnography. Those expecting to find a sensationalized memoir in this book will be disappointed. I also feel uncomfortable when the book is classified as a biography. It is not. But like many people, when I first heard of the term autoethnography, I asked, auto what? My attitude was also like the famous autoethnographist Andrew Sparks, who called intellectual imperialists those who disdained a method of research that did not have a statistical data in it and used informal evocative language. But you know what? The more I read about autoethnography, the more I got convinced that it is an authentic method to arrive at a valid conclusion. Autoethnography is a disruptive method of arriving at the truth by systematically analyzing the writer's personal experiences to understand phenomena in a subculture. Thus, the three basic characteristics of autoethnography are, number one, it is a valid systematic methodology. Two, it relies on lived experiences in a subculture. And three, it employs informal evocative language. The book also wants to demonstrate that such a serious topic as ASEAN diplomacy, and in contrast to stories about battling diseases, LGBT, a religious experience, etc., which are the usual fare of autoethnography, can be studied using the atypical method of autoethnography. From my research, I found out that this is the first time autoethnography is being employed in such a subject as diplomacy. Autoethnography is a non-conventional research. This book seeks to problematize the concept of ASEAN Centrality to generate a fresh definition of the term based on the author's experience as a member of the community of diplomats practicing this principle in their interaction with each other and with ASEAN's external partners, and how this definition influenced or defined her involvement in that community. Autoethnography is a non-conventional research method of arriving at the truth, a definition of ASEAN centrality, by capturing the unique perspective of and recounting the lived experiences of a Filipino diplomat, myself, participating in a community engaged in intra-ASEAN and inter-ASEAN relations, an exercise which I hope will contribute to new scholarship, both in the study of ASEAN diplomacy and the employment of autoethnography as a valid method of research. May I direct your attention to this figure, which is my conceptual framework. It summarizes the framework around which I developed the book. As a direct participant and chair of various subgroups in this community, I recount vignettes of my exploitation of the intimate elements of that subgroup, such as format, tone and language, agenda, processes and procedures, etc., of this singular community of diplomats engaged in ASEAN relations. This community is made up of subsets, namely the ASEAN Committee of Permanent Representatives, the ambassadors of the member states. They're called the CPR. The ASEAN Connectivity Coordinating Committee, they are called the ACCC. The ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation, IPAR. The ASEAN Plus One, ASEAN Plus Russia, ASEAN Plus US, ASEAN Plus China, etc. The ASEAN Plus Three, and the ASEAN and the EAS meeting of ambassadors in Jakarta, which we call EAMJ. We in Jakarta, at that time, and even now, have unanimously agreed to nickname our subculture the Jakarta Channel. Indeed, it is a subculture with its own unique language and ways of doing things. This is the diagram of that Jakarta Channel that are the subsets of the community, the subculture that I was describing. If you notice, you know, we live, Ambassador Manalo and Ambassador Kausikan know this. Our breakfast is this alphabet soup of acronyms and abbreviations. ASEAN Centrality is a concept that has many different connotations depending on who is defining it. In the book, I make a collection of the different meanings or different definitions preferred by scholars of ASEAN. And as I mentioned earlier, my definition is derived by employing the methodology called autoethnography. Thus, the definition I was able to generate has 3 dimensions. Namely, number 1, it is the ability of the ASEAN chair to take on leadership and deliver important accomplishments. Those of you scholars and also diplomats might want to exploit number 1 because the chair of ASEAN, Cambodia for this year, has that unique position to be able to push the ASEAN agenda and of course their own national agenda to deliver important accomplishments. A lot of scholarship might be also focused on that, but it's not so much the focus of my book here. Anyway, the second dimension of my definition is that it is a principle of diplomacy where ASEAN plays a dominant role, advancing its agenda, using its own formats, procedures, and processes, and using the tone and language, the so-called ASEAN way, in the conduct of its relations among the member states and vis-a-vis its external partners. And the third dimension of the definition I came up with is it is an aspiration to raise the level of awareness about ASEAN. At the time I wrote this book, there was a very low level of awareness about ASEAN. And so I said that to have ASEAN centrality, the people of ASEAN must be aware of ASEAN and what it can do for them. I tell the story of how I formed this definition of ASEAN centrality by recounting how it was manifested in the ability of the ASEAN chair. And in this case, of course, I focus on the Philippine chairmanship to take on a leadership role and deliver important accomplishments to benefit the region. A role I imposed upon myself as well, as a Filipino diplomat in the thick of those circumstances. I recount the flagship deliverables of the Philippine chairmanship of ASEAN, particularly the issuance of the Consensus on Migrant Workers and the Framework Agreement on the COC on the South China Sea. The centerpiece of my definition, however, and to which I devote many accounts and anecdotes, I cannot discuss so many here. You might lose interest in buying the book. I'll just show you 1 or 2. Is that ASEAN centrality is a principle of ASEAN diplomacy whereby ASEAN controls the agenda and the outcomes of cooperation, dictates the venue and who the participants will be, determines the procedures and processes, and dictates the tone and language to be used during the interactions. I told stories how each of these elements had been demonstrated in the various Jakarta-based mechanisms. As I mentioned, in the ASEAN Plus 1, ASEAN Plus Australia, ASEAN Plus US, ASEAN Plus Russia, etc. ASEAN Plus 3, the EAS, and even when we, the member states, interacted among ourselves. Please remember that we are 10 very divergent, a group of, I cannot imagine more divergent, more diverse grouping of countries in a regional organization than ASEAN, and how we were able to arrive at a consensus even with the most difficult circumstances, noting the diverse backgrounds and interests that we have in terms of political, economic, and sociocultural differences. I also discussed instances when we could not arrive at a consensus and how we have not allowed those instances to get in the way of regionalism. For example, I recount how one dialogue partner who had proposed the issuance of a certain leader's declaration, that dialogue partner had insisted on using their version of the draft leader's declaration, even when we in ASEAN, and I as chair, had already announced that one of the manifestations of ASEAN Centrality was to use the ASEAN text as a negotiating draft. Those in diplomacy would know the advantage of using an ASEAN text as a negotiating draft. So we had insisted on doing that. And you know what? The ambassador of that particular external partner of ASEAN, I assure you, it was not Russia. We had exchanged at least 22 emails between ourselves. He said, no, we should use our text. I said, no, we should use the ASEAN text, since it's going to be issued by an ASEAN-led mechanism. So finally, I said to that external partner, let us remove this declaration from among those to be issued by our leaders. Of course, the external partner agreed, and we negotiated on that basis using the ASEAN text. This is just one example. I would cite many, many more instances in the book. Also, as I said, the third dimension is my definition of ASEAN centrality is also projected as an aspiration to raise the level of awareness about ASEAN, which I illustrated in this study by recounting my engagements in several forums where I spoke about ASEAN and explaining why, at the age of 62 years old, and having been already a practitioner of ASEAN diplomacy for many years, I had become a student again and a speaker on ASEAN studies, explaining to anyone who would care, who cared to listen about the nature, mechanisms, objectives and aspirations, accomplishments and challenges, as well as the weaknesses and shortcomings of ASEAN. ASEAN is facing cataclysmic changes and mega trends as it enters the next phase of its post-2025 existence. As mentioned, I'm the Philippine representative to the high-level task force on the post-2025 ASEAN community vision. And, you know, such issues as the US-China, AUKUS-China political and economic rivalry, the rise of pandemics and other public health emergencies, increased protectionism, supply chain disruptions, the fourth IR, and digital economies, as well as the need to make a deeper commitment to the climate change agenda and to address the issue of resource scarcity, not to mention the perturbing developments in Myanmar are posing a threat to ASEAN centrality. That is why in the high-level task force, we are paying a lot of attention to the sustainable support for ASEAN centrality. There is need for ASEAN to sustain its centrality, particularly in the manner described in this book. And by the way, may I show you the link on how you may purchase this book? it might interest you to know that all royalties will go to a charitable foundation helping poor children in the Philippines to go to school. Thank you for your patience in listening.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I think that even those who yet didn't have a chance to read through your book might be now interested to do it in more details and more attentively. We have several very distinguished and experienced participants who agreed to take the discussant's role, or I would better say to contemplate on the problems you raised, on the issue of the ASEAN Centrality and how it goes through the decades. I would like to apologize to Ambassador Manalo because Ambassador Bilahari informed me that he has to leave earlier. If you don't mind, I will give the screen first to him for his remarks, and then we will proceed with your comments. So, Bilahari, please, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Manalo, my apologies. I would have had enough time, but we started a little late. Please, I should tell you all, please don't call me professor because I'm no kind of professor. I am a pensioner. And I don't think I am in any position to comment too directly on the very learned and erudite treatment of ASEAN Centrality in the book in question. And I don't think I have to. It has its own validity and others have their own validity too. Because the idea of ASEAN Centrality means different things to different people and looks differently when you approach it from different viewpoints. Yeah. Centrality certainly is not a reflection. I think we have to be realistic about this. It's not a reflection of ASEAN's strategic weight. The strategic center of gravity of East Asia has always been in the northeast and never in the southeast. Southeast Asia is a strategic crossroads where the interests of many powers intersect and sometimes collide, but that is a different matter. But there is, despite the different facets, the different meanings that different people and different viewpoints have given to the idea of ASEAN Centrality, there is a core meaning. And that core meaning is simply usefulness. Usefulness. ASEAN is central because it is useful. It is useful to its members to manage relations with each other. And let's not forget that Southeast Asia is not a region where stability in relationships or even civility in relationships can be taken for granted. And it is central to external powers, our dialogue partners, for example, because ASEAN is at least occasionally useful to them to advance their interests in Southeast Asia. But we should not forget that to be useful is not the same thing as to be essential. I think Ambassador Manalo and others would remember that before we came to use the term ASEAN Centrality, we used to talk a lot about ASEAN being in the driver's seat. ASEAN being in the driver's seat. But I think it's good to remind ourselves that the person in the driver's seat is sometimes only the chauffeur. Now, to continue to be useful, ASEAN has to do things. That is to say, our usefulness is not to be taken as self-evident. It has to be earned, created, and recreated according to contingencies of changing circumstances. And the strategic environment that we are in today is more than usually uncertain and in a more than usual state of flux. So to remake yourself, to remain relevant and therefore central in this changing strategic environment is, I think, the central challenge facing ASEAN. We'll have to think long and hard how we can remain relevant and useful and therefore central in the midst of the broad and profound changes that are swirling all around us. Now, whether we are able to do so, whether we have been able to adapt in time is a matter of opinion. But my own opinion is that we have not. Let me give you just one example. I think the manner in which ASEAN dealt has dealt with Myanmar has come to a dead end. I think it was correct that we should set a baseline of principles of acceptable behavior for one of its members in the 5-point consensus that we reached in April last year. At the same time, however, I think we went a step too far when we decided to suspend the SAC, as the military regime calls itself, from participation in ASEAN meetings until it fully complied with the 5-point consensus. Because the odds of it complying with that 5-point consensus was not very high in the first place. If the Tatmadaw, the Burmese military, was really a kind of organization that would have forsworn violence, would have exercised restraint, would have engaged in a dialogue with its political opponents, which would allow a third party to act as an intermediary between it and its political opponents. If it was that kind of organization, it would not have staged a coup in the first place. Now, the prospect of influencing the Tatmadaw was never very large in the first place. Let's face it, ASEAN has no effective sticks and no effective carrots to change the Tatmadaw's behavior. We can only change its behavior by talking to it. And if we do not allow it to attend our meetings, how do we talk to it? You know, it can't read our minds. It doesn't want to read our minds. And this idea that Myanmar can only be represented by a non-political representative is actually, frankly, a ridiculous one. Because even if Myanmar were to be represented by the office boy of the Myanmar Foreign Ministry, you know, that office boy could not attend a meeting without the approval of the State Administration Council, and so that would be a political representative. So I think we have lost something of our strategic realism, and we'll need to recapture this if we are going to adapt to the very fluid strategic environment that we are in to remain relevant and therefore central. I'll end here. Again, Manalo, Ambassador Manalo, my apologies for taking your position, but I have another appointment, and I have to leave in a while. I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you, Bilahar. I think that here you see that we have taken your points with great interest, and I think that they're intellectually stimulating. Of course, the opinions may vary, but the question of strategic realism is very important in today's discussion and in today's world, I would add. Let me give the screen to Ambassador Manalo, who is also a Filipino diplomat with huge experience behind her and in her knowledge, which she passes to the present-day students. Ambassador Manalo participated in the development of the ASEAN Charter, and actually, I think, have been viewing the ASEAN in the retrospect and in the prospect. Ambassador, please, the screen is yours for your comments.
Thank you very much, Madam. Good afternoon, everybody from Manila. But it's afternoon here in the Philippines. First, let me thank Dr. Andrey Baykov for your very warm welcome remarks. Thank you, sir. I also wish to thank my ambassador now over there in Moscow, Ambassador Bailen, who grew up under my guidance. He's very dear young officer of the Republic of the Philippines. Excuse me. Please close the door. I don't have. May I also thank Elizabeth Buensuceso and congratulate her for having been able to produce a book entitled ASEAN Centrality. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of it and I have not read it, so it's very difficult to comment on the content. So I'll just be brief and just pass over it as far as I can see without reading the book. Okay. I am an old school diplomat. When I came into the service of the Republic of the Philippines, we had before us what was then known as ASA, the Association of Southeast Asian Countries. Then there were only 3 Southeast Asian countries there. Then came Mafilindo, Manila, Philippines, and Indonesia. That did not work. So we went back to ASA. And finally, to the initiative taken by no less than my friends from Indonesia, we followed them, and together we invited the rest of Southeast Asia who could join us to establish what was then known as just ASEAN, on the basis of a simple declaration. And as we all know, if we are authorities in international law, a declaration does not legally bind a state. It is a charter or an agreement that binds the states to fulfill their obligations under international law. And so in 1993, I was very proud to tell you, and I'm still very proud to tell you all, that I was designated to be the chairperson in the negotiations of the ASEAN Charter. That ASEAN Charter until now exists, and it is what is being implemented or guiding the member states of ASEAN today. The ASEAN Charter of 1993. To be quite honest with you, since I have been away from the Foreign Office, and I will not be joining the Foreign Office quite recently for purposes of, but the very simple reason that the Foreign Minister of the Republic of the Philippines is my son, and I don't want anybody to think that I dictate on him or that I am running the Foreign Office and not him. But I am very happy to be where I am in the academic world, helping the younger generation of Filipinos to become good diplomats. Now, I would say that what interested me very much, aside from developing the ASEAN Charter, which you can all read because it's available, and it is what still guides ASEAN, was the development of ASEAN dialogues. I don't think ASEAN could have existed just by itself in this region without having dialogue partners. And that is where we found wonderful people who have contributed much to the running of ASEAN. Amongst them, you people from Russia. We have dialogues with the Russian state. We have dialogues with every other state that you can find listed in the list that is being shown. Now, that ASEAN is in the driver's seat is very simple to explain. Since most of the dialogue partners, if not, I would say almost every partner, is a developed world. And we in ASEAN, the 10, are in the developing world. We established the so-called ASEAN in the driver's seats in external relations to tell the developed country partner that please listen to what we want, and this is how we want things to be run. We are getting out of being just colonized territories. We have our dreams, we have our ideas, we want to succeed in this manner as a very productive, cooperative, peaceful region in the world. And that's as far as I can remember what ASEAN is. And so this afternoon, I still reiterate that I am so happy that we have with us our partners from Russia. But I cannot close without delivering a statement with respect to Dr. Victor Somsky. Dr. Victor, the last time we saw each other was way back when we met at Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, and Miss Ekaterina Baklanova was with us there when we had for the first time a dialogue, just you and me and several students from the university over there. And Madame Ekaterina was on the sidelines helping you out. Where are you, Dr. Victor Somsky? Please, I'd like to say, there you are. Welcome, Dr. Victor Sumsky. I would love to have you again lecture. You lectured at the Ateneo de Manila, and I would like to have you lecture come back after this COVID thing is ever. I will welcome you at the university where I am the Dean of the School of International Relations and Diplomacy. And I think my students will learn very much from you. Thank you and good afternoon. I'm ready to entertain any questions, which I'll be honest enough to tell you, I know the answer, or I'm sorry, I don't know the answer. Thank you very much. Congratulations again, Beth.
Ambassador, that's a great pleasure to listen to you all the time when we have such an opportunity. And you actually did my job mentioning Dr. Victor, because he is our next speaker and commentator on the ongoing discussion. So, Dr. Victor, a couple of words from you, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Ekaterina. This book is certainly worth more than a couple of words, and if I take it too seriously, please interrupt me. But I'll need to make these comments. But first of all, I'd like to start by greeting Ambassador Buensuceso for producing a book which I think is a very interesting mix of disciplined thinking on the subject of ASEAN and that element of extravaganza which is essential if you want to make a book readable, and really is sometimes almost entertaining, but at the same time a very good guide for any outsider who wants to learn more about the intricacies of ASEAN internal politicking and bureaucratic procedures. I must confess that after 10 years of being involved with the ASEAN Center as its director, I still need a guide to lead me through all the complexities of this labyrinth. And I also have to say, to confess, half jokingly and half seriously, that after these systematic exercises, I do have a bit of what I may call ASEAN fatigue. But your book was in some ways quite refreshing. It also reminded me of interactions with you personally during the annual sessions of the ASEAN-Russia joint committees. And I take this opportunity to thank you for your cooperative and friendly attitudes during these encounters. Of course, I need to greet too, in a most friendly way, Ambassador Rosario Manella and Ambassador Harika-Usikan as outstanding professionals and very cooperative partners for ASEAN Center for quite a number of years. I just need to admit that I learned a lot from both of you, and I enjoyed each time we had the opportunity to meet and discuss sometimes very in-depth the matters related to Russia-ASEAN relations and to ASEAN matters and to the intricacies of regional politics. It was a real privilege being a partner in these discussions, and I'm very delighted to be today one of your co-panelists. Talking about ASEAN Centrality as the subject of this book, I think the author herself mentioned that at times it's becoming a kind of a mantra, what Jesuits called all things to all men. And that's a serious difficulty in dealing with it, and I think many things which are mentioned in the book about the origins of this phenomena will be very useful for anybody who wants to really understand it. What I want to do very quickly is to give my very simple understanding of both the essentials of ASEAN Centrality and the reasons why we sometimes sadly have the feeling today that it's becoming a bit problematic to maintain it in the way in which it was successfully maintained just maybe 4 or 5 years ago. ASEAN Centrality is very closely linked to what has emerged as the regional architecture of the Asia-Pacific region, and specifically to the multilateral dialogue platforms which ASEAN initiated and helped to launch. I'm talking, of course, about the ASEAN Regional Forum, about the East Asian Summit, and about the ADMM+. ASEAN in this network is not just a creator of this platform, but as a moderator, and I have to emphasize a collective moderator. This emphasis on collective is important in the context of Ambassador Buensuceso's statement that ASEAN is an extremely divergent organization. To be a collective moderator in such conditions is a very serious challenge, and I think we may give many examples of situations when ASEAN dealt successfully with these challenges, but now we also have the examples of how difficult it is to continue to do it the way it was done just a while ago. The other problem is that these dialogue platforms where ASEAN has to be a collective moderator are also extremely divergent too. So if you have a divergence between your partners and you are divergent yourself, you may have a really critical situation when these divergences will be projected into each other and will create a set of problems which will be as difficult to unfold as, for instance, the problem that ASEAN is now facing with Myanmar. So that's what I basically wanted to say about how I see centrality in self and the problems with it. And my great wish is that ASEAN passes through this very difficult phase without traumatizing itself like it almost has done, but I hope have not completely done, in its relationship with Myanmar. It is one of the primary tasks I think the ASEAN facing is putting its relationship with this country, for a whole variety of reasons which we may not discuss right now, into some new and basically cooperative setup. My final remark is about one aspect of this very interesting work. I am getting back to the book by Ambassador Buensuceso, with which I am afraid I have a little problem. And I will not try to solve it right now, but I would like to outline what the problem essentially is, and I will be interested in the opinion of the author, if we have time for that, in the afterwards discussion. She mentioned this in the book, and she mentioned it right through her presentation, that in the ASEAN centrality in relations with ASEAN dialogue partners means that ASEAN is the dominant part. My question is, what kind of partnership is it if one of the partners is dominant? It's an unequal partnership, I'm afraid. If this is not what Ambassador Buensuceso means, then I would like to know what's the meaning, in her view, of ASEAN dominance in dialogues with its partners. Otherwise, I would like to say once again that I found this book very provocative in many ways, in a positive sense of the word. I think that Ambassador Buensuceso demonstrated on many pages of her book what does it mean to think outside of the box, which we all have to try to always do, and I congratulate her with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Victor. With all our excellent discussants, I think we have a more complex and multiplex vision of what ASEAN Centrality is, though, of course, definitions may vary. If I may add just a couple of points, I would say that we all agree that ASEAN Centrality is an outstanding phenomenon, even though it is or soon will be under serious transformation. And this is a work in progress which requires constant thinking, intellectual, diplomatic, practical input to keep it going and to be relevant in the contemporary world. But if I may also add here a Russian touch, I would say that quite recently, contemplating on Russia-ASEAN relations, I've discovered that we have at least one more thing in common, apart from that we are that Russia and ASEAN are dialogue partners, that we try to enhance our trade and economy relations and political understanding. We both actually depend on multilateralism, irrespective of what ASEAN is as a group of small and medium range countries, and of that Russia is a much bigger geographically, physically, politically, economically, in some respects, but not in all. And we all need it. So we all need ASEAN centrality in a way. ASEAN for its own purposes, Russia for being relevant in the region, and hopefully that we will go through all the contemporary turbulences with a newer and more effective way of building and sustaining this ASEAN centrality. We have received several questions. Some of them refer to bilateral relations between Russia and Philippines. Let me not start with them, because our today's speaker has been focusing on ASEAN in particular. And one of the questions was coming from Dr. Ekaterina Baklanova from Lomonosov Moscow State University. I was wondering whether Dr. Ekaterina is now with us online, and whether she wishes to ask her question herself. Dr. Ekaterina, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sadinova. Thank you very much, dear distinguished guests and speakers. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, ASEAN Central MGIMO, for inviting your colleagues from Moscow State University. Always, it's really very informative and useful for us as specialists. Dr. Buensuceso, I would like to ask, if possible, how can you estimate the role and place of the Philippines as a Philippine studies scholar, role and place of the Philippines in the ASEAN now, through these years and now? Could you please make a short briefing on that? Thank you. I'm sorry, am I heard?
Yeah, we've heard it. Ambassador, have you heard, well, the question that was about the role and place of the Philippines in the ASEAN now? Would you please comment? What do you think?
I respond now. Okay. I would just like to thank the many well thought of remarks and comments made by previous speakers. Indeed, those are issues that ASEAN must confront. As I mentioned in the last part of my presentation, that these are cataclysmic changes and mega trends that are confronting ASEAN now. But for example, on the issue of Myanmar, sometimes academics focus on one or two issues, such as Myanmar and the South China Sea, well, I am myself guilty in not making a balanced presentation of the many issues of cooperation within ASEAN. And some other academics equate ASEAN centrality as a unity of positions and stands, which is not the case in this book. In fact, describe many instances in the book where ASEAN did not have or does not have a common position. So, but it is also valid to say that ASEAN centrality is challenged by the lack of a common position on certain issues. In fact, I talked about the South China Sea issue in that instance. But let me focus especially on the problematic question by Dr. Victor. I like very much your academic as well as practical approach to commenting on the book. When I say ASEAN plays a dominant role, I am putting the dynamics of diplomacy on the table. When it doesn't mean that one partner is dominant over the others. What I am saying is that ASEAN has to approve the agenda. For example, in one of the instances here, one dialogue partner was insisting that we should discuss only human rights in the discussion, that human rights will occupy a big part or the biggest part of the dialogue partnership. Of course, ASEAN talks about human rights, but it should not be the only topic in the agenda. And so ASEAN has to set the parameters, ASEAN has to set the agenda, ASEAN has to set the guidelines around which diplomacy will move. And so this is the meaning of what I am saying. ASEAN has to approve and have the final say in looking at the agenda, what procedures and processes to be used, as I mentioned in one of my examples, etc. That is the meaning. It doesn't mean one partner is dominant over the others. And finally, if I may address the question of Dr. Ekaterina, another Ekaterina. I like that name. It's the name of my daughter. Actually, she's Karina, but I teasingly call her Ekaterina. Anyway, thanks for singling out the Philippines, the role of the Philippines in the as ASEAN grows in importance, as ASEAN grows in the scope and area of cooperation. In the first part of the book, I mentioned areas that are close to the heart of the Philippines. And actually, it has a continuation because as I mentioned, I am representing the Philippines in the visioning of what ASEAN should look like and should focus on in the next 20 or so years after 2025. And in that, and I already brought on the table issues that are close to the heart of the Philippines and are close to the heart of the ASEAN people. And I'm sure many of you in Russia also will agree that these are issues close to the heart of humanity. And for example, the rights of migrant workers, the rights of marginalized people, the rights of women and children, the rights of indigenous peoples, etc. We already put that ahead in the agenda of the ASEAN post-2025. And so the Philippines has taken the lead in doing this. Also, I hope my other colleagues in the HLTF will not mind it, but we are calling for reforms in how we do things. There have been many criticisms about how the consensual way of arriving at decisions have hampered the development of ASEAN. And so we are introducing some reforms. I hope the other colleagues in the HLTF will realize that ASEAN is not immutable. We will have to take into consideration all these mega trends, all these cataclysmic changes. Otherwise, ASEAN will be swept away into oblivion if we do not pay attention to the things that are happening around us. And so the Philippines, together with, of course, our colleagues in ASEAN, the Philippines is putting forward such vision for ASEAN. And I'd like to assure you that we in the Philippines, we consult with our stakeholders. We conduct consultations with civil society. We conduct consultations with our business people. We conduct consultations with our human rights group to feel the pulse of the people, which we will bring to the table in the ASEAN platform. So this is the role of the Philippines as ASEAN progresses into the next 20 or 25 years in the future. Thank you.
Maraming pong salamat, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We still have some, 7 minutes or so till the end of the event, and we have got 2 more questions from the audience. One is coming from our student Nigel Lee, a 4th-year bachelor's student here. Please, Nigel, your question.
Thank you very much for the presentation and the enlightening discussion. What I noticed just now, Ambassador Buensuceso, you said, the way you were so impassioned about ASEAN, reminded me that all of us citizens of ASEAN countries, we have to be activists for ASEAN. And so my question to you, and I would like to hear what Ambassador Bilahari will have to say, beyond Myanmar, how should ASEAN convince states like Laos and Cambodia that ASEAN centrality is more valuable than leaning towards external powers like China? And as such, how do we ensure that external powers accept and respect ASEAN centrality? So what do we do about states that, seem to have their activism for ASEAN wavering?
So how to get along with more active, very proactive, very, very proactive external powers, please.
Yes. I like the adjective you used for me, passionate. That's true. I was just discussing with our staff. People get tired or bored of ASEAN. I have been dealing with ASEAN matters for 13 years straight, and yet I don't get tired of ASEAN because I am aware that it has the potential to help our country. It has the potential to help our people. But, you have to be inside ASEAN to be able to exploit what it can do for our people and for ourselves. ASEAN has been criticized, much maligned by many, many people. And yet, if you are looking from the inside, looking outside, you will know that you are operating in a realistic, pragmatic way. Diplomats, government people are able to not look at ASEAN with jaded eyes, with fairy tale mirrors, but you are able to accept all the warts and scars and weaknesses of ASEAN and yet contribute to how it can work, how it can push the national agenda at the regional platform. So beyond Myanmar, ASEAN has been able to achieve cooperation. In fact, in the book, I also described that you don't have to put it there in the agenda. For example, I outlined there the 101 reasons why ASEAN should be fighting each other, because we have so many bilateral disputes, one against another. And yet, in the Philippines and in some Bahasa-speaking countries, we have the payung, the umbrella. When it is too hot, the umbrella will help you to not feel the heat too much. And so ASEAN provides the umbrella or the framework with which we are able to settle our disputes and differences in a more peaceful manner. So for me, this is the other function of ASEAN beyond what is on the table, what beyond the agenda that is on the table, it provides an umbrella for us to be able to relate to one another. There is a section in my book about how I talked to the Malaysian ambassador, how to manage the issue of Sabah, for example. So this is, as Dr. Victor said, a realistic description of diplomacy, but at the same time, I try to follow the academic framework, the discipline of the conceptual framework. So what I'm trying to say is we realize the many weaknesses and criticisms about ASEAN, and hopefully we should be able to institute reforms, institutional reforms and administrative changes that could address those criticisms and problems about ASEAN as a regional organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And with what you have just said, the question which we have received from through the chat box is, I mean, the question from Ambassador Rosario Manalo is very much in correspondence. Ambassador Manalo, could you please ask your question for the audience?
Beth, the decision-making in ASEAN is by consensus. Will this manner of decision-making, which we have been observing ever since, strengthen the relations with our external partners so much so that you can say ASEAN is in the center of all these relations? I raise this question because I have had an experience when I was still in the service that some of the partners in ASEAN would say, ABC, I say 1, 2, 3, partner 1, 2, 3 says, the three of us are ready to carry out whatever be, let's say, an economic relationship, let us say, with Russia. And the 7 others said, we are not yet ready for that. Where is the centrality then? Where is there ASEAN? I'm raising this question because if you will call for centrality, that means ASEAN as ASEAN. As if it comes out only with 3 countries, what happens with the rest? Suppose it's in due course of time, the rest cannot catch up, and 10 years pass and 15 years pass, there is no centrality there. That is my question. How do you resolve that? Have the ASEAN leaders, in which I'm no longer involved whatsoever, have they really truly studied consensus building? Have they found it useful for our external relations? Maybe relations amongst us, yes, but relations with partners, it may not be as effective as we would wish it to be. Thank you.
So the heat of academic discussion went up. Ambassador, could you please comment on that? And I'm afraid that will be our final exchange of opinions, please.
What an interesting and beautiful question, my dear friend, Ambassador Manalo. I will answer with 3 dimensions. The first one is consensus is still the general principle that is being followed by ASEAN today, in the sense, and for me it has been useful because when there is consensus, everybody owns the project. There is ownership, and because there is ownership, everybody will implement what has been agreed on. So that's the first. I don't have much time, but I wish we had more time, but this is the first level. In general, consensus is still the principle being followed because of that factor that there is ownership, there is buy-in to implement whatever is agreed on. And you know very well that the structuralist nature of ASEAN cooperation is, you know, we don't have too many too many treaties, too many laws, but the principle of they become norms of behavior in the way forward. So that's the first dimension of my question. The second one is, the second dimension is that we already follow the principle of simple majority in economic agreements. For example, in this RCEP agreement, the Philippines has not yet ratified the RCEP, unfortunately, because we have to contend with our newly established parliament or Congress, and so therefore we will require some time. So, if there are already 6 participating countries that have ratified, then it goes, and then the others will just follow. So there is a practice in the economic pillar whereby you don't have to have all 10 already participating. For example, about 2 years ago, a very good project on the ASEAN single window on customs clearance. The Philippines also participated last, number 6, and it's going, even if there are even if you don't have 10 yet. And the last dimension of my answer is yes, ma'am, we are seriously looking at an alternative way of arriving at a consensus when we make political decisions, because that is where, up to now, we require 10 out of 10. And it is a very serious bone of contention in our job at the high-level task force. We have until 2025 to debate this particular issue of what consensus means. Does it mean 10? Does it mean supermajority? Does it mean simple majority? To enable us to classify a decision as a consensus decision. We are discussing this because we know the sentiment of people, of ASEANites like you about this consensus way of decision making. So hopefully we might be able to arrive at a solution to this current dilemma that we have now about consensus in political decision making. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Buensuceso. And I think that all who joined us in campus and online are expressing their very huge sincere thanks for your frank talk to us today, and for your time and for the opportunity to touch this reality of ASEAN diplomacy through your eyes, through your experience. And I think that that's a very valuable opportunity. So unfortunately, we have to wrap up this discussion, though I feel that it could have been going on and on. And my huge thanks goes to our discussants, to Ambassador Manalo, to Ambassador Kausikan, and to Dr. Victor Sumsky, as well as to those representatives of the ASEAN embassies who found the time to join us here today at MGIMO. Thank you, and we hope to stay in touch, and we are very much looking for further opportunities to reconnect with you and with all the colleagues from ASEAN.
Thank you.